Welcome to BC Professor Spotlight, where we learn about professors' passion projects or research in minutes. I'm Dr. Heather Perez, the Associate Dean of Online Liberal Arts and a professor of philosophy, as well as co-host of this series. In this episode, I'll be interviewing my co-host, Dr. Haley Mathis, a philosophy professor here at Broward College. Hi, Haley. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, thank you so much. So my name is Haley Mathis. As you said, I teach Intro to Philosophy, Intro to Ethics, and Intro to Logic here at BC online. And I got my PhD in philosophy in 2019 from the University of Miami. And I also am the mom to two lovely little girls.
So you said that you got your PhD in philosophy, and I know that that involves writing what is basically a giant, large, paper called a dissertation about something that you're interested in, that you become an expert in. Can you tell our students and our audience a little bit about your dissertation?
Sure. So my dissertation sort of starts with the question of free will, but asks questions about morality and how that relates to the question of free will. So I guess the starting interesting philosophical question is, do you have free will? I think most of us feel like we do, right? I freely choose to do things all the time. But as you know, as a fellow philosopher, this is actually a huge and very controversial debate. How can you be free given that you're strongly influenced by your early childhood and genetic makeup, for instance, two things you have zero control over. And there's so many fascinating parts to this argument. For instance, there were studies done by neuroscientists who found they could predict a person's movement by looking at which part of their brain lit up, even before they felt that person had made the decision to move. So you might feel like you're free, but if your brain decides before you're aware of making that decision, is it free?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one because if my brain is already lighting up about the fact that I want to raise my hand, even before I've even considered raising my hand, it goes against all of my intuitions about free will because my brain is sending these signals before I'm even conscious of my intention to raise my hand. That makes it seem like maybe, because I've read this study as well, that maybe those brain signals are causing both my hand to go up and my feeling that I'm causing my hand to go up. So if that's true, how can I be responsible for any of my actions?
Yeah, that's the worry. And of course some philosophers think, yeah, there could still be free will. It depends how we define free will. It's such an interesting philosophical question. But of course it kind of raises questions. It's like we can't just base it on I feel like I have free will. We need to think philosophically about the issue. And it's a fascinating philosophical debate. But actually my question was not this in my dissertation, but my question was, what does this whole debate mean for morality? So if we aren't free, are we morally responsible for our actions? If nobody's responsible for what they do anyway, is it fair to blame the murderer? I mean, maybe he had a really bad childhood growing up or something. Can I fairly praise my friend when she donates all her spare time to helping children in need? Maybe she got genetically lucky. And maybe it's not her free decision after all and her ultimate responsibility. So that was sort of my worry and my interest in my dissertation. And I argued that, yes, we can still understand all the important moral stuff, regardless of whether we have free will or not. And specifically, I talk about a theory called care ethics and argue that it has a particular advantage in explaining some of this stuff without making assumptions about free will, all this important moral stuff we want to explain. And what makes care ethics unique as opposed to other moral theories is that it says emotions, specifically care, it's in the name, and
Right.
morality are at the heart of care and empathy, sorry, are at the heart of morality, yes. And this is different than theories, for instance, that put maybe autonomy, autonomous decision making, and rationality at the heart of morality. What's interesting is like care and empathy are direct and immediate motivating forces. So when you care or empathize with somebody, you're going to want to act. It's going to motivate you to act morally. And whether you're doing so autonomously or freely, it just doesn't matter. So it kind of gets around that question. And also, the interesting thing about care ethics, as opposed to other moral theories, is it's something called agent based.
Mhm.
So to explain this, I usually tell my students there's kind of three parts to a moral or to any action, really. The stuff that comes before it, your motivations, the person you are, all of that, the action itself, and then the consequences. And
Right.
there's also happens to be three types of very, very broadly speaking, of course. I'm sure you talk about this too in an intro to ethics class. There's kind of three main theories of morality. A consequentialist approach says it's that consequence, the stuff that happens after the actions, whether they're good or bad, that make the action right or wrong. The deontologist says that there's something about the action itself, it's just intrinsically right or good or intrinsically bad. And charactericists say it's the agent, namely their caring or empathic motivations or lack thereof, that make the action right or wrong.
So
So
in that case, how does care ethics focusing on the agent get around some of those issues in free will?
yeah, so what I think it does is that it explains why it's fitting to react with maybe positive emotions when I see my friend helping children in need, or it explains why I can react with negative emotions and why it's kind of like permissible to react towards the person even though maybe they're not responsible for what, or maybe they are, right? I'm agnostic
Yeah.
on that. But um it's fair to react to the person because they're what makes the action right or wrong, and it's just what it is to be in caring relations to others, to have those negative reactions when somebody displays a lack of care, or positive reactions when you see somebody display empathy. So that's just what it is to be in those caring relations. And we can react towards what we call it the wrong making feature. And for care ethics, the wrong making feature is the agent. So it's fair to react towards the person who's doing the action negatively or positively. And it doesn't matter, who cares if they did it freely or if they're ultimately responsible. The point was it was right or it was wrong. So it's fair to react in that way. So basically, I'm trying to argue in my dissertation that we can understand morality, and especially if we understand it in terms of care and empathy, and our moral standards aren't in danger, even if maybe the concept of free will might be in some danger, or at least it's controversial.
Yeah, so from what you've said, your dissertation argues for that role for morality, even if we're not truly free, or if our intuitive idea of free will is in danger. And you talked a lot about how it might be in danger. Does that mean that you yourself don't believe that we have free will? Were you persuaded by the studies that you mentioned earlier about, you know, the brain signals going before we even have a chance to consciously formulate our intentions?
Good question. And my official stance is I have no idea. This debate seriously boggles my mind. That's why I call myself a free will agnostic. So you might have heard the term agnostic in the debate in philosophy of religion. So theists believe God does exist. Atheists believe God does not exist. Agnostics just don't hold a belief. So maybe they even think it's rationally impossible to know. So I just took that idea of agnosticism and applied it to the free will and moral responsibility debate, and was like, look, I just don't want to take a stance. And in philosophy, as you know, we think a theory is better. We call it, you might have heard of Occam's razor. So if a theory is simpler, if it has fewer really contentious or controversial assumptions, we think it's all the stronger. That theory is all the stronger. So my official stance is to stay agnostic on the entire free will debate.
And then, as you said, that means that your position on ethics is a stronger one, because if we find out that we do have free will in that way that we all feel that we do, your theory still holds up. And if we find out that we're not free, care ethics isn't undermined like some other theories would be.
Exactly.
Well, cool. Thank you for telling us about your dissertation. For a fun question on the side, what would you have chosen to be in your life if you weren't a professor?
I wish I had the skills to be like a stand-up comedian. I'd be terrible, terrible, terrible at this, based on the pity laughs I get from students when I try to crack a joke. But I do love comedy. But maybe more seriously, two things, since I was a kid, was I always wanted to be a writer or own a small business. And I took a couple years off when I had my second baby, and I sort of was able to do some of this on the side.
That's
I
really cool. What did you do?
Thank you. So I started by writing an intro to ethics textbook because I love teaching ethics. My dissertation was on it.
Mhm.
And then I had this really specific idea for how I wanted it to be published, because nowadays, for better or worse, students are learning by scrolling on their phones. I mean, we're all engaging learning things
Yeah.
for better or worse, as I said, by scrolling on our phones. We listen to multimedia stuff, watch videos, and I wanted to make a textbook that was sort of like that, that mirrored that, but also gamified, fun, interactive, used multimedia. But the problem, of course, with that is like also have ethical publishing standards on social media. Anyone can post anything they want. So having peer review and but have those kind of cool other features. So anyway, I had this really specific vision and I wanted to control how I published it. And my first job long ago was at a publishing company. So I ended up starting my own little small publishing company. I called it Boundless Books Publishing because I thought, well, it doesn't have a traditional textbook binding. I was trying to be cute, I think.
I think
But
it's a
also
really good name.
abilities are boundless because it's not online and, you can use multimedia. So I have a couple professors that are assigning it. They seem to really like it. They've told me the kids love, because I try to make it gamified. So the kids, like the students, I should say, love interacting with it in that way. And it's small, but it's a little after the kids' bedtime side hustle. And I am really passionate because I feel like it combines everything I love: entrepreneurship, writing, and of course teaching.
Yeah, and I'm sure that your experience now as an fully online professor gives you an idea of what might be more engaging to students, and then you can bring what you're learning both on the publishing side to your students and vice versa.
Exactly.
Well, it was really great talking with you today. I appreciate you coming on as co-host and telling us about yourself so that before everyone moves on to learning about our additional professors, they get to learn a little bit about us. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in for this episode of BC Professor Spotlight. Learn about passion projects and research in minutes. I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit about Dr. Haley Mathis, our online philosophy professor here at Broward College.